Hello there. I thought I'd have a talk today about carers and who cares for the carers. The society that we live in today is very different to the one we lived in a few generations ago. And young children and young people don't have a memory of it, but I do because of my grandparents and the age I'm at. So I still have that living history. So you go back a couple of generations or so ago and families were all together, like the Asian families now. So you had multiple generations living in one house, and you had a lot of people in one house because they didn't have birth control, and families were generally quite big. And so if somebody got sick, they were looked after by the whole family. And now we live in, do they call it nuclear family, where we're all separated in this country now. And we all live apart from each other. And every couple that I know, or every family I know, has got somebody who you would call the carer. And these are the people that go above and beyond. They're the ones who look after everybody else and put themselves last. But what happens when the carer needs a carer? So you see this when somebody gets sick and they get ill. When it's a carer, they have to force themselves to get better faster. And so they don't recuperate properly and they don't get enough rest. So let's say, for example, I was speaking to a guy the other day on here, and he has literally just had an operation. And he's a carer for his mum and his brother. And he's cooking. And I said, what are you doing? You should be in bed for at least a couple of weeks, bed rest. And he just looked at me with that look. And then I laughed and I went, yeah, sorry. Because he can't, can he? And his mum goes, yeah, it was awful because when he was in hospital, I had to try and walk on a stick to go to the shop. And because he had an emergency operation, it wasn't a planned one. They wasn't prepared for anything. So when he went into hospital, there was no one to look after his mother. And his brother isn't any good at anything. Even though there's nothing wrong with him, he's just not a carer. So the carer in their family is this poor guy who ended up, he could have died. He had an emergency operation on his appendix. And there was no one to look after him. He's come home from hospital, and normally they send you home to recuperate. So you're only in hospital to have the operation and the basic medical care, and then they send you home and you're supposed to get looked after when you get back home. And he's had to go straight back to work, and then straight back to cooking, cleaning and doing everything else. And I thought, oh my gosh. And I thought, I'm going to do a video about this. Because every family has got a carer. I'm not it in mine, to be fair. I am selfish and I admit it. My care work was temporary, and that's when my children were young. And that is when I was a carer, and it lasted for a number of years and then they grew up. But in my family, it's my mum, my sister and my other sister's husband. There's like 3 main carers in our family. And they're the ones who look after everybody else. And you think, those people rarely talk about their illness, even though sometimes they're iller than the people they're looking after, because the people they're looking after are sort of like baseline always sick. But when you are normally healthy and you get sick, it really floors you. But no one looks after them. So when they get floored by an illness, whether it's the flu or whatever else, they have to try and force themselves to get better faster than anybody else so they can get back on with looking after the other people. And I think it's really sad. But I'm always analysing everything, so I'm thinking like this, right? We live in a day and age, it's turning now, the eras. If you look at history, it's always going round in circles. So you've got your golden era, and then you've got your dark ages and all the rest of it. We are heading back to the dark ages, and people keep saying, no, we're not, we're going back to the golden dawn, to a golden era. But I think we've just had it. So go back a few generations back. You didn't have DWP and you didn't have NHS. So you had no free healthcare in the UK, and you had no benefit system. So if you couldn't work and your family couldn't take care of you, and you were all destitute, because people was back then, because they didn't even have minimum wage, then you would be in either an asylum or a workhouse. And that was it. So only the very privileged were looked after by the families. And it was a privilege when you think about it, because they didn't get anything for it. And not only did they not get anything for it, it would have been extremely difficult, because they were already overcrowded, they were already hungry, underpaid, malnourished and all the rest of it. So imagine you've got somebody who's sick. But when you look back at history, when people got sick, they tended to be sick in a big way, but for a short time, and then they'd die. Because if you couldn't afford a doctor and an hospital, you could die even from a tooth abscess. So people tended to die quicker. So I don't think they lived quite as long back then as well. And of course they didn't anyway, because we know that going back in history, people tended to die younger anyway because of the poverty and the housing conditions and stuff. But now we've got a nation of people who get paid when they're sick, and you can get carers allowance and whatever, but we've also got NHS. So you've got doctors who keep people alive on tablets, but they're never well. So we've got a sicker nation in a way, because people stay sicker for longer. So you can say, well, we live to about 70 now, let's just say that's the average age. But how many people are actually well until they're 70? A lot of people I know start getting sick in their 30s and 40s, and then they're ill for 30, 40 years, and they're never well. So a carer in their situation has got a lifetime career of looking after that person. So imagine having a disabled child. I mean, again, you go back a few generations ago, if you had a disabled child, they were put in asylums. You didn't even bring them up. My nana was one of a kind. When my Auntie Susan were born, she had a learning disability. And my grandparents got told she was going into an asylum, and my nana said, no, she's not, and they took her home. But she was rare at that time, because we're talking the 1940s, late 40s, early 50s. And she said she's coming home with us because she's my child. And so she raised her, and she was raised outside of the system. But that was a lifelong caring for my nana. My nana had my Auntie Sue from birth till my nana died. Then my mum took over and looked after Sue until Sue died. So that Susan was a one-off for her generation, because a lot of people her age were put in asylums and they were basically written off. And the names that they were called, I won't even repeat because they are insultive now, but the words that they used were very different to the ones we use now. But now we're living in a society where if you have a disabled child or you get a disability, you don't go anywhere, you stay at home, usually. And so someone's got to look after you. And if they can't, then you have to go into a home or something like that. But look how hard it is to be a carer. I mean, for one, right, look at it like this as well. If you're looking after somebody full-time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because they're your relative, your child, you get paid a baseline rate. And I don't know what it is, but it's not enough. If that person who's sick is put into a home, I know when I've worked in nursing homes that the cheapest room I remember was £450 a week, and that was for basically bed, breakfast, evening meal, and that was the basic at the very basic bottom line. Now I know it's a lot more. So you're talking about £700 a week to be in a nursing home, getting looked after to a degree. And it's not like being looked after at home, because you've got like one member of staff to 6, 7, 8 people, whereas at home it's a one-to-one. But you never get paid enough to have them at home. And it's like children, isn't it? You know, if you've got your own child, you'll get X amount of money for that child, like child benefit. But if the child goes into the care system, it's hundreds or even £1,000+ a week for them to be taken care of by a stranger. So we don't look after the carers. They don't get paid enough. So imagine you're caught between no man's land of, I want to work full time, I enjoy my job, I've got a career, I've got a profession I want to do, but can you afford to have that and pay someone else to look after your person you're caring for while you're at work, so then you can come home from work and take over? Or do you have to give up your career to be a full-time carer and never have the same amount of money? It is really tough. And I feel sorry for the carers, because they're the ones who get overlooked. They're treated like they're professionals. You should be the doctor, the nurse and the caregiver and be everything to that person who's sick. But you're not going to get any rewards, and you don't even get a holiday, you don't even get a break, you don't get any time off. My mum and my nana, when they had Sue, they both loved her, and that is what made them see this in a very different way. It was love that made them not be bothered. But my mum never ever, and my nana never had a day without Susan. It was always me and Sue go shopping, me and Sue go to bingo, me and Sue, me and Sue. It must be so difficult if you've been with someone for a long time and they've always been well, and then suddenly they're not well, and you've got to take care of their every need. It must be so difficult, because you lose your independence yourself. It's not just the person who's sick who loses their independence, you lose yours, because who's going to take care of them while you do your thing? And I think that the government, like I said earlier, everything's on a cycle. I think they do this all by design, and it's all deliberate. So we've taken away the family unit. If you look at the construct now of the family unit, we are all separated from each other. So when somebody is in a couple and that one person in the couple gets sick, the other one person has to take care of everything. Whereas when we all lived in a house together, a big family, that one sick person would have been taken care of by a whole bunch of people in their own little ways. And so the pressure wouldn't have been just on one solitary person. So I really do feel for all the carers, because you don't get enough praise, you don't get enough thanks, and you don't get enough recognition, and you don't get paid enough for it. And you are doing a professional career as a carer, and yet you've got other people who never have aught to do with you, and like doctors who just come along here and there telling you what to do. But you're the one doing it all. You know that person better than the doctor. I just find it really sad. But just got somebody walking past it. They always get lost on this park. So yeah, I'm going to go, because he's going to come back and they're going to start screaming. So, but yeah, what do you think? Are you a carer, or are you somebody who's ill, who gets cared for? And how does that make you feel? Because there's 2 points here. I'll do another one about the person who needs caring for, because there's two different people in two different dynamics here with two different issues. So who looks after the carer? If you're sick and you're a carer, who looks after you? How do you cope with being ill yourself if you've got somebody else to take care of? Can you even afford to be ill? What happens if you get the flu and you're bedridden for days, usually with that? What do you have to do? Do you have to force yourself to crawl over the floor and feed the other person? What I want to know, because I think it's time we recognised the carers, because they don't get enough credit for what they do. And I just find it quite sad that we don't appreciate the people that need it the most. Anyway, I'm going to go and I will see you later.